Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Political, Economic, and Cultural Implications of Marine Animal Protection. Thank you so much for joining us today, and greetings to those who will be watching the recording on YouTube. I'm Lucia Guy, the co-founder and the managing director of the Institute of Animal Law of Asia, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Institute of Animal Law of Asia, or ILA, is the educational research center that focuses on animal law issues in Asia and the world. At the ILA, we provide research projects that include animal law in Asian countries, on topic, on category, and on species animal law articles. This year, we have launched two programs which are enhancing legal regulations for aquatic animals in Kazakhstan and farmed animal welfare in mainland China that are supported and sponsored by the Center for Animal Law Studies, Lewis and Clark Law School. We also have our news source, Asia Animal Law Bulletin, that covers the latest updates on animals in Asian countries and regions. Last year, we have launched the Alliance for Animal Law of Asia, which is the international networking campaign that aims to cooperate with national, regional, and global organizations to improve the awareness of animal protection in respective regions. You can support our work by donating or sharing our website and materials. Not too long ago, we have launched our own shop where you can make a general donation or fund one of our research projects on farmed animals, wildlife, companion animals, or aquatic animals, or any other research project, and also fund one of our animal law webinars or translation services. Since the beginning of this year, we have held quite a few events. You can find the recordings going to our YouTube channel, which is Institute of Animal Law of Asia, or check out our website, the events page. Please visit our website, ialasia.org, and follow us on social media. It's iAnimal Law Asia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Today's webinar is organized under the project I'm leading, Enhancing Legal Regulations for Aquatic Animals in Kazakhstan, within the Global Ambassador Program launched by the Center for Animal Law Studies, Lewis and Clark Law School. I express my deep gratitude to CALS for making this possible. Our guest today is Kat Besch, the founder and director of Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue. Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue was is one of the members of the Alliance for Animal Law of Asia and was one of the first organizations that joined the Alliance and the only organization representing Vietnam. Kat has extensive experience in rehabilitation work, but also focuses on addressing global animal rights issues through the lens of regional political, economic, and cultural contexts. We'll be answering questions after the presentation, so please drop your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kat, and we all are looking forward to your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was a great introduction. And thank you, of course, for all your work at the Institute. It's just, I'm really so impressed with all of the different webinars. So I hope to be able to build on that, because I think there's a lot of other topics that have kind of led into this one. So hopefully I'll have something pretty good to add. So I am sharing my screen. Let me know if you am I sharing my screen?
Not yet.
No. Okay, let me try this again. Share screen. There it is. PowerPoint slideshow, go.
Okay, we can
now. Yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so the topic is political, economic, and cultural implications of marine animal protection. So basically the topic itself talks about all these like human behavior aspects of what ultimately is about animals. So this is a very complicated thing to discuss in terms of animal rights and law, of course, because I think law is so much about regulating human behavior. So let's get into some kind of aspects of this that will be very interesting if I could figure out how to keep moving. Okay, there it is. So yeah, so I have a degree in international relations. I am not a lawyer. I've known a lot of lawyers. I decided not to go to law school because I didn't like Scotch very much at the time, but I am very interested in law and animal law. And I've learned to like Scotch a lot more. So if there's any lawyers out there, then I get it. But anyway, so I have a degree in disaster management. My focus was on climate change related disasters, and particularly how animal and human welfare were impacted. And that's something that's going to come up a little bit later in the presentation as well. So I look at things from both perspectives. I think there's a really like environmental aspect of disaster management, and there's a human element of disaster management, and there's a very political and economic element as well, which all ties into international relations. I've been living outside the US for 15 years, but I am American. I grew up in the Washington, DC area. And I've been living in Vietnam 8 years. I've just been kicked out of it since, well, not kicked out, but I was away in March 2020, and then they closed the borders behind me a week later. Surprise. So I've been stuck outside. I currently am in southern Poland, but the thing is, I'm really interested in how about this subject around the world. I mean, some bits and pieces of examples will come from Vietnam because that's a good portion of my life. But I've been in a lot of different places. So I've lived on the Gulf of Mexico, on the Atlantic, on the Pacific, South China Sea, North Sea, Mediterranean. I've spent time in the Caribbean, the Baltic, and the Adriatic. There's a really wide variety of development levels there, and variety of rule of law, variety of different economic structures within those different places that I've lived in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And North America as well. So I have kind of a wider perspective of what this means. And I think there's a lot of commonalities that I'll share with you in a minute. So the organization itself that I work in, I began it as a welfare organization. So this coming from an American that has this concept that like legislation will save the world and all we need is some better laws. And I was frankly full of crap. I had no idea. So since I've been living outside the United States for as long as I have, about 15 years, the majority of it has been in countries a much weaker rule of law. And so Mongolia was a good example, which was a bit of the wild west. And Vietnam, though it is a middle income country now, low to middle income country, it's still really lacks in the ability to basically enforce a lot of legislation. So when I started the organization, I was working with cats and dogs, and I realized that we couldn't do a whole lot with laws, not only because I'm a foreign organization, but I mean, the locals couldn't do anything either. I mean, legislation in general is a joke in Vietnam. So my worldview has changed in regards to animal protection. I am firmly anti-speciesist as well. I am a pig and chicken mother, in addition to being the mother to dogs and cats. Most people who think I run an animal rescue and that makes me a good person would also eat half of the species in my shelter. So I become a little bit militant against that mentality. If you love animals, you don't eat them. I find that to be true for marine animals as well. The interesting thing about marine animals is that I realized when I went vegan in 2013, about a month before I started the organization, and watching the biggest welfare organizations ignore the topic of fish for many years has sort of grown into this little this thing that just gets me irate to be able to look at it at an international organization's website and see that they are not actually talking about a very huge portion of the animals killed every year. So my development as a person has turned into who I am as an animal rights activist and in my academic interests in marine animal protection. Okay, so I need to define what marine animals are. It's odd that I have to do that, but when you talk about marine animals, if you ask a lot of animal advocacy organizations, they will discuss dolphins, whales, sea turtles, sharks. It's about all you got. Yeah, you don't hear a whole lot about the actual like fish and crustaceans, bivalves, marine invertebrates, corals, reptiles. Like there is a huge chunk of animals that aren't really being talked about. So when I say marine animals, I'm talking about a very large, like system, a marine ecosystem. So, and that of course includes the plants that live there, the seaweed and the kelps and things like this, and the microorganisms, and that involves the bacteria, viruses, archaea, protists, and fungi. So this is like these are the metabolic engine of the ocean. If you disrupt them, you are going to be harming marine animals of many, many kinds. And we need to really look at the subject of marine animals in a more holistic way. So, so what are the biggest threats to marine animals? Well, killing them, fishing. Yeah. It is a major threat to marine animals. And I want to be very specific about what kind of fishing. Trawling, fishing poles, dynamite, aquaculture, legal, illegal. If you ask a shrimp or a tuna or a dolphin what is a threat to them, they're going to say pretty much anything that kills them, right? And that involves fishing, whether you do it in a way that the law has decided is nice enough for you to die, or if you do it in a way like, you know, a fish doesn't care if it's being blown up or has a hook in its mouth or is being, you know, shoved into a net and suffocated slowly over hours. It also doesn't care if it's been electrocuted before you slit its throat and gut it. And ultimately, fishing, the consumption of sea life is a threat. Yeah, all of it. We also have other threats to the marine ecosystem, and which has been killing animals, of course, marine animals. So that would be ghost nets, entanglement within them. So that usually involves the animals that weren't intended to be in there, though, of course, we should pay attention to the ones that were intended to be in there, because ghost nets themselves are not the problem. Nets are. That seems logical. It seems to be missing from the current discourse on marine animal protection and ocean protection, but I'll get into that. The other thing is prey depletion. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, people care so much about dolphins, save the dolphins. Oh, everybody just shits a brick, pardon my French, when we see the dolphins being killed in Japan, but nobody seems to care about what dolphins eat. So that's a problem. Yeah, they need to eat something. So then and also the larger predators, we're missing so many large predators now. Some of the big predator species are disappearing. The whole ecosystem is so connected, and we've managed to divide it in so many ways that just make it digestible for the public instead of looking at it holistically. So other problems we have, of course, come from trade. The ocean is a major source of international trade. Of course, you've got the acoustics that come from those large ships. So we've got shipping of all kinds. You've got the fishing fleets, of course, are quite noisy and they do a lot of damage. There's a lot of pollution that comes from them. Naval sonar, of course, is a really big thing that interrupts a lot of the sonar systems in animals. We've got pollution, both solid and oil pollution, you know, either from the ships themselves or getting it from like the, you know, oh geez, the one in the Gulf. Why am I missing this right now? I can't even remember. Oh, anyway, the one that happened in the Gulf of Mexico. And then tourism, of course. People think that, you know, we're not harming them by just going out and looking at them. Well, they're not there for us to look at. And they certainly don't want our bottles thrown in the water there, and they don't want our garbage, and they don't want all of these things that come with human intervention. It's not a zoo. The ocean is not a zoo, and we need to start paying attention to that. Right, so this is one of my big topics, speciesism and marine animal protection. So my real concern here is that the legal frameworks that are seeking protections for these very popular species, such as turtles and whales, are kind of avoiding a much bigger subject. So out of 700,000, okay, it's a rough estimate. So they're saying between 700,000, like a million-ish species have been identified in the oceans. And there's only 20,000 of those are fish species. Here's a fun fact: 119 out of 700,000 species are mammals. But who gets the most attention? Who gets the most protection? What laws are, you know, what animals are the laws specifically looking at? So they're looking at a lot, and not that those are not important. It is not that those are not important. It is that they are the only ones receiving the attention. And people get very concerned about things like, how do we legally enforce the prevention of ghost nets, right? So all the plastic that goes into the oceans from the fishing industry, and that destroys both, you know, the marine habitats, and also kills a lot of animals. And nobody really wants to talk about the fact that those nets were used for killing the 1 to 3 trillion fish that were killed, and everybody's just up in arms because it's killed a turtle and ignoring everybody else that it was meant to kill. So we really need to talk about a holistic picture. So as a fundraiser, as somebody who's been doing professional fundraising pretty badly for 8 years, I can tell you there's major economic distinctions between the value of the donor-friendly species in conservation fundraising campaigns and those of the not so friendly. Let's look at this guy, for example. So I think he's beautiful, but that's not important, is it? What I think is beautiful and what you think is beautiful and valuable is not really important. Yeah, he thinks his life is valuable. She could be. And whether he's pretty or not, he is suffering from the same plastic pollution, the same oil spills, the same other anthropogenic threats. He also will be caught in fishing nets. He will get all of those effects, and people are missing that picture. So we tend to put a lot of cultural value on these intelligence. I hate that. I hate when people talk about the intelligence of animals, as if the humans have the ability to discern who is valuable and not valuable, depending on whether they can put a puzzle together. Because we wouldn't do it for humans, we certainly shouldn't do it for fish or other land animals. But they gather so much importance. I mean, like, I'm thinking about places like New Zealand, even Vietnam, talking about whales, and Japan, sort of that cultural important place on them. Also, we protect them from being, there's a good example, Faroe Islands, right? So they have sort of that annual the whale killing and things like this, and then you've got it in Japan with the dolphins. People just lose their little mind while they're cutting into a sea bass, and pointing those savages over there for doing that thing because those people are bad, but their consumption is not, which doesn't make any sense. I'd say 80% of our oceans are unexplored, right? That amount of information that we don't know. We don't know the species. I say we've got 700,000 species that have been identified. Out of what? We don't know how many more there are. You know, we are systematically destroying this environment and all of these creatures in it as a result that we know almost nothing about comparatively. 80% of the oceans, 80%. I want that to stick in your mind. So here's the political implication. So because of the places that I have lived, I think and talk a lot about the rule of law, right? So the rule of law, let me see if I can get a really good definition. Rule of law, basically, if you have a weak rule of law, it means that a country is lacking the political will and the capacity to enact legislation, particularly in an equal way, right? So rule of law basically means that the people that live there have decided that the law is equally enforcing the law. So that limits things like corruption through bribery, for example, which I've just lived in so many bribing countries. I'm in one right now, frankly. I mean, Poland definitely hasn't gotten rid of theirs. Their rule of law still is shaky. But places like Vietnam, of course, are a lot lower. The thing about rule of law and marine animal protection law is that it does require the institutional resources for figuring out how to protect them. So I was reading something recently about Indonesia and their ability to enforce fishery law, right? So fishery management laws. And the issue really is that, so if you're going to figure out what's going to work, you need to find out your population count. For one thing, you've got to have researchers that are able to go out and figure out what is there, where are the nursery sites, where are their breeding sites, migration, nurseries. These are all really important things to make good laws. So enforcing law is one thing. Making appropriate laws is really important process. And I just see that I forgot a parentheses on that. It's just going to drive me crazy, so I can't look at it. But I'm very grammar and punctuation oriented. But anyway, so you have to look at the species impacted, and you have to look at the ecosystem as a whole. This is a institutionally heavy project. So that makes good laws. And then you have to enforce them. So people basically have to believe that it's something worth being enforced. So the people that are part of that fishing industry, they have to accept that those laws are for good, and they have to accept that the government is going to apply them, and that it is something to be concerned about. They have to change their behavior in order to fit those legal restrictions. So, well, let's say on the other end, you've got strong rule of law, right? So best example I have would be Norway. And Norway is considered this gold standard for sustainability and fish welfare. So they have a really well enforced and also rather expensive monitoring system. So they have those institutional resources for researching the proper laws in order to protect the animals that are the target species. But to expect every country to have those resources is absurd. It's just, Norway is such a bizarre example of this. And, I think it is something, that people do want to aspire to be in many ways, to have the strong rule of law over the marine animal protection. But ultimately, it's just not really reasonable for most countries. So it also, because Norway has such a massive industry in agriculture, particularly, it's 50% of the agriculture in Europe, over 50%, I think it's 54 or 56. It's a ton of fish. They're exporting a ton of fish. They have a high domestic consumption, which is interestingly falling. I don't know why. But ultimately, it's a very important industry to Norway, to the Norwegian people. In a region like that, in which it's a little more difficult to have different types of agriculture, I think they look at that as such an important food source. So they're going to protect it with all they've got politically, because it is such an economically valuable industry. So here's the thing about having great welfare and having great rule of law in regards to fisheries management. Even if they are enforcing the best welfare standards, how can you ensure a full compliance with that, right? Even in the best regulated systems, the idea of giving a good death in the open seas to a massive fishing industry with a huge export and pretty decent domestic consumption, how can you possibly ensure that, right? If we are looking at it from the fish's point of view, it's questionable, right? So Vietnam is on the other end of things. I mean, I know this isn't specifically about Vietnam, but this, like I said, I've been living there for a while. Here, gosh, I still think of it as my home, but even though I'm in Poland. But yeah, I mean, there are these huge ranges in how things are enforced, depending on how strong the rule of law is. So that's one really important aspect of this. So here's the thing. For the animals themselves, they are the victims. And whether the rule of law is strong or weak, they will die. Okay, so if they are protected under perfectly enforced welfare law or not, they are still victims of harvesting for the seafood industry, right? So, what I think it's important to pay attention to this one word, harvesting. So harvesting is something that we use that word for harvesting something that has no sentience. So for example, we would harvest oats and wheat, we would harvest carrots, we would harvest apples, yeah? But a fish has feelings. A fish has a complex range of emotions and complex nerve system that does feel pain. Yeah, so you can't harvest it, can you? You just can't, right? So let's look at the difference between Norway and Vietnam. So we talked about, the differences between strong and weak rule of law. Well, if we're looking at it from the point of view of the two, of the fish itself, this is where they're gonna end up. Yeah. So there's a woman, she's gutting a fish, and it's on the streets. This is what I see every day in Vietnam. Somebody's gonna pick it up. They sit in these little buckets all day. Right. They're all dead. Yeah. To the fish, this is not good welfare. They're dead. Yeah, this is poor marine animal marine animal protection. So that's why I really want to make sure that we begin to shift this conversation. And especially in researching this and trying to gather all this information, everything I see talks about it from only the human aspects of it, the economic aspects, from talking about development. We talk about the, having the political will. We talk about policing the oceans. We talk about, cuisine. We talk about all these things and food security and whatever, but very little discussion is about the animals themselves. So I would strongly suggest that we need to start talking about marine animal protection from an animal rights perspective, as opposed to welfare or, well, the human side. So here's economic implications. And I do want to point out that I am concerned about these things. I think people tend to look at animal rights people and say they tend to discount their interest in human rights as well. And I don't. I mean, like, living in Vietnam on the sea, I mean, what, Vietnam's got like 3,400 kilometers of coastline, right? I've done a lot of ocean swimming, and I spent a lot of time around fishermen. I've had to interview a lot of them. The fishermen are a big part of my life. They're my neighbors. These aren't people that I just see in a YouTube video, or I'm not some city dweller. These are real people to me. I know their names. I know where they live. I know where their kids go to school. I do very much care that they are able to continue to put food on their table, send their kids to school, and have health care, right? So the thing we have to think about is there's 380 million people. That's about 10 to 12% of the world population right now that relies on the fishing industry. This supports entire communities. So we're not talking about my neighbors that are fishermen. We're talking about, the restaurants they go to, the places they buy their food, the markets that support the communities that live around the fishing communities. Like, all of this is this huge industry that comes with fishing. It's not just that people on a boat somewhere, right? We have to consider an entire community as being part of the fishing industry, right? So there's a $160 billion global seafood market. That's a big number that is very vague in a lot of ways. So I don't want to get too much into that, but it's not small. This is a really huge part of the world economy. So food security, right? 3 billion people, 3 billion consume seafood for 20% or more of their protein. Yeah. Luckily, that's actually not that high, I would say. So, I mean, considering how many people eat land animals, we have to put those in perspective as well. But I would say when I talk about food security, I also consider where people are. So there are places in the world where you don't have to eat fish, and there's places in the world where you probably don't have any other choices. So speaking of Norway, for example, if you're in a northern island in Norway, you are probably pretty reliant upon fish for a good portion of your protein. And there's not a lot of other options. Like, you're not going to pick lettuce out of your garden or tomatoes in January in Norway, in a northern island. These are places in the world that I definitely understand a lot of indigenous communities as well that are not able to access other options. I'm not really talking about them, frankly. There's a whole lot of us that have other options. Yeah. And we need to really start thinking about what our part is in this. So when we talk about the word sustainability, this has nothing to do with animals. It just doesn't. Anytime we use the word sustainability, it's an economic term. Fish don't give a damn about our economic sustainability. They don't care about the biological sustainability. They don't want to die. We again have to look back at what the victim thinks about this. We have to think about, we're talking about marine animal protection. We really need to discuss marine animals, and they don't care about sustainability. There's two words I'm pretty sure marine animals and other animals don't really care about. Sustainability and welfare. They don't want to die. End of story, right? To me, it has no place in animal rights. I don't want to get into it, but this is the word that seems to come up when we talk about marine animal protection. We very rarely talk about animals, and we always talk about how humans are going to benefit. Why is this not working? Okay, so the cultural implications. How am I doing on time? Okay. Cultural implications of marine animal protection. Right. So the idea of fishing, like, look at this picture. I thought this was a great picture. So you got 3 generations here. You got grandpa, you got the son, you got the grandson. Everybody's really happy and they're going fishing. Isn't that beautiful? This magical bonding moment between the men and the family, and they're gonna, sit around and be quiet because men aren't really great at communicating, and they're gonna enjoy taking an animal out of the water with a metal hook at its face, and it's gonna be a fantastic bonding experience, and everybody's gonna be so proud of themselves for bringing home a fish for somebody to slice up and cook. I've been fishing. I've dated men that went fishing. I've had lots of fish. I understand there's a lot of this. There's a very, I don't know, it's in the culture, and this is just the individual aspect of it. This isn't even talking about communities, but fishing, especially in places like where I've been living in coastal areas, it's a huge part of traditional culture. It's a really big part of folklore, music, art, literature. Fishing isn't just, so it's not just food. There's a lot of things to fishing that go so far beyond cuisine. But in general, marine animals are considered ingredients, just ingredients, not something that is a sentient being. So I want to look at cuisine a little bit for a second. So fish sauce in Southeast Asia is something that's sort of ubiquitous. It's sort of like butter in France or the United States, right? It's like ghee in India. It's just one of these things that kind of goes in everything. So it's made from like all these tiny little anchovies and full of salt, and it stinks and it's nasty and people love it. And they have a vegan version. So that's awesome. That's kind of the thing with fish sauce in Southeast Asia, is that it's very difficult to avoid in some ways. And so the idea of fish kind of being in everything, even in Laos, which is a landlocked country, fish sauce still remains a pretty important part of the cuisine. So like escaping fish can be very difficult as part of the food system. Also parts of regional cuisine, sushi, for example. Sushi is a big one. Fish and chips in the UK, running up to the local chippy, grabbing, what is it, a haddock or cod or pollock? I don't even know anymore. I haven't had fish and chips in a really long time. I've had vegan fish and chips though in London, which was terrifying because I was damn sure it was an actual fish. And I kept going up there and asking them. I was like, you're kidding, right? You're lying. This isn't vegan. But it was beautiful. Banana blossom wrapped in like nori and then fried perfectly with chips and the vinegar. It was magic. You don't need fish to have fish and chips. Shrimp in Alabama. I used to live in Alabama in high school. Shrimp boils. This is a huge cultural event. You get all these people together. In Maryland, it's a crab boil. In Alabama, it's a shrimp boil. But you get all these animals to boil to death in a pot, and everybody stands around and gets drunk and has fun with each other. It's a cultural thing. Also nutrition. So there's a lot of places, like I was saying, that really just don't have a lot of plants in their diet, and this seems to be a big part of it. Religion, the symbol of fish in Christianity, it means Jesus Christ. You can't really get rid of fish in Christianity. It's a very, very tight little concept. So we need to really look at how all these things are infused into our culture. So how do you take them out? If we're trying to protect marine animals, we have to find a way to protect marine animals within all these cultural aspects. Cuisine, folklore, music, art. We need to really be a little more honest about how the victims themselves are being addressed in these situations. And so that's something we need to think about. Right, so this is one of the things that I talked about specifically. It is not in the title, but it is quite important to all aspects of it. Climate change is no joke. Obviously, it affects a lot of things in economically. It affects a lot of things culturally and politically. It kind of fits into everything. So climate change is not something that only affects coastal communities. It's not something that only affects the fishing industry. It's something that affects every living thing on Earth. As far as fish, what happens when the waters get warmer and currents change, it changes migration, it changes all sorts of things within the ecosystem. And it also changes the way the fishing industry catches fish, frankly, because things are moving around and certain species are being depleted as a result of the way that the oceans are warming. Here's the thing about the oceans that people don't seem to really get out there enough. And by people, I mean environmental groups and animal protection organizations and anybody that talks about climate change, but fish are important for preventing climate change. The oceans are pretty damn important for sequestration. I'm not going to get into important it is. We've got, we talk about the rainforest all the time as being the lungs of the planet. What do you think the oceans are? Right? I mean, carbon sequestration is one of the biggest tools that we have in order to combat all of the CO2 we're putting onto the planet, into the air, and the oceans are able to pull that out. So this is a really big thing. I studied climate change related disasters in my master's degree, and it just really blows my mind all the time is talking about how cyclical this is, so pulling fish out of the ocean reduces its ability to do the job of carbon sequestration, and as a result climate change gets worse, and climate change then makes it harder for fish to live in the ocean, right? So all of these things sort of, are cyclical. It's the same thing with, factory farming and animal production on land. It's that it produces so much global greenhouse gases and then is affected by these. So the global greenhouse gases affect climate change, which affects climate change related disasters, the strengthening of typhoons and hurricanes, and what is the word? I'm making storm surges much worse as well, because of course rising sea levels and then the water comes inland more. So that then affects those animals. So it's kind of this exchange. So we really need to be, I'm trying not to go over. I have so much to say about this. Climate change itself is a really big topic. And I think the thing that bothers me so much when I talk about climate change in the oceans is that I see so little of this being talked about in the environmental groups and the animal advocacy groups as well. So I'll get to that in a second. I'll have my moment with them. So I really like this picture, the picture in the background. I love this fish. I think he is just stunning. He is like, look at those lips. They're so, so cute. So I made him so big that everybody could just stare at his adorable little face. So the one thing that I really would like to see in marine animal protection is changing the rhetoric we use. I really think we need to change the message, and we need to focus it a lot less on the human aspects of it, and understand that those human aspects are dependent upon those marine animals being protected, not the other way around. So the thing that really bothered me, I was looking at the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO website a couple days ago. I mean, honestly, every time I look at their website, I kind of want to punch a wall. There's normally a lot of screaming out at the screen. They just make me so angry sometimes at the things that they say, encouraging animal agriculture and not discussing our solutions to it. So the thing that they said that really pissed me off was this: all of us must work together to protect the oceans, seas, inland waters, and marine resources, and ensure in sustainable livelihoods, diets, and development for the future. Did they say anything about the animals in there? In fact, they just called them marine resources. So fish are not just ingredients or resources, they are living sentient beings, and that is not even being discussed. So let's see what the RSPCA says, because, oh yeah, they protect animals, right? So we are doing everything we can to ensure that all farmed fish are reared to high standards of animal welfare and transported and slaughtered humanely. I swear when anybody puts the word slaughtered humanely together, I just like, oh, my brain just explodes. How is that even possible? Fish are not a vital resource for the human diet. We have other things to eat. It is, if you are unnecessarily taking life, it is not humane. You can snuggle me to death, but if I didn't want to die, it's still murder. We need to get that straight. The real problem here is that most major animal welfare organizations do not even mention fish. 1 to 3 trillion are being killed every year, and they don't even talk about it. They don't even bring up the word fish. Really? All of this is going to come to a head at some point, I hope. I really want everybody that says, I love animals, to understand that they're not just the ones that we can see up here. Yeah, there's a whole lot more in those oceans, 80% of which we haven't explored, that are still our responsibility to protect, not dominate and destroy. Yeah. So this is something that upsets me when I talk about land animals, and it's definitely upsetting me when I talk about sea animals, because they are dying in such larger numbers. We only talk about how they're killed by the tons. Very rarely do you see the fishing industry even discuss the numbers of fish that are actually being killed. They only talk about them in terms of weight. What does that say? They're just an ingredient. They're just a resource. They're just here to be harvested, right? So, oh, now I can't see. Move out of the way. There we go. How do we change human behavior to benefit marine animals? That's a really good question. So rule of law I was talking about before, in the absence of this, or in great strong rule of law, there are still a lot of limitations. Hang on, let me move my face out of the way. So basically, how do we change human behavior is the real question. How do we change human behavior to benefit marine animals? So there's lots of ways we change human behavior. Traditional norms or rules, right? So like just kind of how we exist as humans culturally. There's a lot of things that like decide what we will and will not do. And those things do change so much over time. The idea that these things are static is just absurd. We do have the ability to change that. Religion, like I mentioned before, Catholics and the fish symbol, meaning Jesus Christ. Well, here's the weird thing. I'm in Poland. It's Friday, actually, isn't it? It is. So on Friday, Catholics don't eat land animals, right? But they eat fish. Right? So they don't consider fish to be animals. When I used to live in Poland, I was not vegan at the time, and I loved smoked mackerel. It's everywhere. You get it everywhere. Mackerel and herring, and I loved it. It's just really salty and actually quite nasty and greasy. And I loved it. And the Catholics thought I was such a good little girl because I wasn't eating meat on Fridays. But we need to really get religions. The Catholic Church is really... There are some Catholic organizations that are beginning to make this a little more, getting a little noisier about animal rights, and I'm very happy to see that. And that they are, what is it? I'm trying to think. There's a newsletter that I'm on that's about religion and veganism, and really interesting the way that they're influencing plant-based diet changes, getting people to talk a little more about veganism in terms of compassion. So then we also have family, social business and etiquette, economic incentives. I'll get to that in a minute. Basically, we have to understand that human behavior change in regards to animal protection of any kind, marine or land-based, it does not rely strictly on laws to govern. Human behavior has so many different things that we can address. And we must work with these other means of societal regulation in order to achieve our goals. We really need to start thinking outside the box. And I know that's probably hard if I'm talking to a lot of lawyers, but I do believe in the law. I think there's a lot of great things about it. I think we can work in marine protected areas. We could have, fishery sanctuaries and things like this. There's a lot of things legally we could do, both in international and regional law, and also, of course, increasing rule of law in all countries, I think is really vital to helping animals. But that's not all we got. We got a lot of tools in our tool belt here, and I think we need to start focusing on them. Changing consumption habits, right? This is happening. Yeah, this is really moving forward in a lot of places, a lot less in others. Here's a good example. In Warsaw, just in Poland, I can tell you that there's two vegan sushi restaurants. Yeah, what does that say? Poland, nobody even thinks about that, especially not Warsaw, right? We all think of blocks and it's gray and no, they got vegan sushi, 2 places. It's so good. I went to one a couple years ago. I hope they survived the pandemic. But this is happening in a lot of places you wouldn't expect. Like I said before, the fish and chips in the UK. So this is taking something that is really ingrained in British culture, which is fish and chips, and just switching it out for something else. And it's amazing. Banana blossom is definitely my favorite way to go. I would say tofu is a close second. It depends a lot on the fry, but anyway. These things are happening. So replacement products for all other different types of land animals. Look, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's happening. We have to get better at it. Animal product consumption has increased in spite of all the many very wealthy animal welfare organizations. People are still eating more animals. So obviously we need to work a lot harder, but those products are becoming available. And so we also need to talk a lot about the widespread dissemination of the health benefits of a vegan diet. I said vegan, not plant-based. I'm very, very specifically interested in that word vegan. I'm tired of it becoming a dirty word in so much advocacy, and it's not dirty. I mean, like I got the tattoo. I'm not afraid of being vegan. I don't know why anybody should be. It doesn't make me militant or psychotic. It doesn't make me, I don't know. I'm really healthy. I don't understand why we just can't say it. So I really want people to start talking about a vegan diet, and that needs to be through all animal advocate organizations. Yeah, if you can't say vegan on your website or in your social media, what are you doing? What are you doing? I know it's probably financially beneficial for you, but speak up. You don't speak up for the animals, you speak up for the producers and the consumers. If you can't say the word vegan, yeah, I just don't have time for you. So ultimately, we need to do a lot better job in our marketing of the vegan message, and it has to come from the people who are considered to be experts in animal protection. Yeah, so like I said, they're not talking about fish at all. They're not talking about marine animals and our dolphins or orcas or whales. You know, we've got to expand our circle of compassion here. I'm really limited on my belief in using a moral art to change a lot of things. I find that to be very limiting, because in my experience as an animal rights activist for 8 years, and also in my experience as a vegan hating non-vegan for 33 years, a lot of people just don't care. Frankly, I think morality isn't particularly important to a lot of people. I think people eat based on habit and convenience and just palate pleasure, and you can give them all the information in the world, and if that's what's available, that's what they're going to eat. If that's what's normal, that's what they're going to eat. If that's what they like, that's what they're going to eat. So I think there's a lot of ways we need to be addressing this. So I just feel like I can get on my moral high horse all day because I don't murder anybody, but like frankly most people just don't really give a damn. Right, so I'm gonna get myself out of the way. So here's some economic and political solutions to protect marine animals. And I think these are really important. How much time do I got? I'll be fast. This is going to be hard because I'm really into seaweed, but I made this a very small part of it because I know how I get with seaweed. Seaweed farming is one of my favorite things to talk about right now. Seaweed farming as a replacement for animal proteins and for its carbon sequestration is beyond brilliant, absolutely beyond brilliant. I adore seaweed. I personally like to eat it, but that's not all one does with seaweed. The seaweed farming process itself, like I said, for carbon sequestration is absolutely brilliant. But hang on, there's a cat that's trying to get out the door. Actually, your cat. So, sorry. Anyway, so the thing about seaweed is that there's a lot of benefits of getting people who have been involved in working on the seas, working in processing seafood, people who've been working in the deep ocean and fish. We have to look at those people that are still involved and rely upon the fishing industry for their livelihoods. What are we going to do with them? Well, seaweed's a really great option. I don't think seaweed does particularly, not all seaweed does well everywhere, but ultimately there's a lot of different types of seaweed, and there's a lot of ways that we can farm it in ways that are really so much better for the environment than what we're doing to the fishing industry. It's so regenerative, and I really want everybody to look into it, but I'm gonna stop going crazy on it. But like, if you get me talking about seaweed, it's just dangerous. Also, we need to look at government subsidies. Governments put so much money into upholding, to like supporting these industries that are bad for the environment, bad for human health, and are failing. They're failing already, and we still keep them held up. So I don't have a problem supporting livelihoods, but we've got to make sure that those livelihoods are not destroying the marine ecosystems, killing marine animals, and bad for human health, right? So putting plastic into the oceans and all these things. I mean, the fishing industry is so bad. Stop putting money into it. Where can that money go? What are we going to do with it then? Well, we could support seaweed farming. So I'm not going to get into it, but I really feel like if we move away from subsidizing failing industries that are killing animals and move it more towards plant-based farming, I think we're going to see a big difference, because that means you are bringing all the stakeholders to the negotiating table. So people ultimately are fishermen because that's what they've done their whole lives and because it makes them money. We'll give them something else to make money with. That doesn't hurt anybody. It's not rocket science. This is possible, right? But they're going to require some assistance to go from being a deep sea fisherman or a shrimp farmer or in aquaculture to doing seaweed farming or other activities on the sea. The other thing we can use, I've been reading some about this as well, using fishing fleets to patrol marine protected areas. I'm not trying to take anybody off the seas as much as I am trying to get them to do something less harmful. Right? It's just like when we talk about farm transitions, you know, I don't want you to farm cattle or chickens, but you've got a great facility for growing mushrooms or hemp, right? I'm perfectly happy you making money. You just need to make money doing something that isn't murdering anyone, right? Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Right, here's the conclusion. What can we do better? Right? I think what it comes down to is I don't have all the answers. I don't ever believe that answers are the answer. I think the answer is questions. We need to better define our questions. And the reason we need to better define them is because they're not being centered on the animals themselves. And so the biggest question, all nicely in bold here on this slide, is this working for the animals? The animals, is this working? Yeah, we need to take these solutions that we've had, these laws and all these things that we're doing to manage fisheries, and say, is it working for the animals? Are they still being killed? Because we keep asking, is this good for the fishermen and is this good for producers and consumers? But we're not asking, is this working for the animals? So we need to look at, how can we promote animal-free food security? Food security is super important. It's a political implication, of course, because food security promotes political stability. Political stability promotes food security. Another cyclical situation here. We need to really talk about getting off of the seas, stop killing animals for better food security. There is a massive increase, not massive, I guess, I'm exaggerating, but there is an increase in seafood consumption that the demand is getting higher and the supply is not. And the number of unsustainable fisheries is going much, much higher as well over the past 20 years. And we're going to have, fish-free seas in just a few decades. So obviously it's not a very food secure product. So how can we protect animals while also protecting coastal communities, economies, right? Again, like I said, I'm not trying to create ghost towns down coastlines. We need to engage all of the stakeholders. How can we increase the rule of law in protection of international marine sanctuaries, right? Who can we engage in that process? Former fishermen? That'd be great. 70% of the Norwegian Coast Guard is involved in, it uses their 70% of their time and resources goes into enforcement of fishery protection. I don't know, that's not a bad idea. And how can we attract partners in protection for marine animals, right? So the people that should have been on board already are a little late to the game, or the environmental protection, animal advocacy, and the political arenas, but I don't think they're beyond help. We just have to engage them. We've got to help people understand why marine animals matter. This is a good thing to bounce off of. Okay, I'm getting close. So I'm going to open it up to questions here in a minute, if that's okay. Let me see my last slide. What is my last slide? And there, I don't know if you can see this. Loving animals means living vegan. I don't really know how to love and kill, so that's the way I see it. And that's kind of the principle my organization is built on. So there you are, Lou. Hi. Okay. But please, I just want to point out, anybody that wants to chit chat about any of these subjects, I will debate this all day long. Please contact me at any point in any way you possibly can. I would love to talk to anybody about this. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really, really useful. And I like your perspective on advocating for animals and veganism. So we're now shifting to our questions. And the first question is, what's your attitude to global warming and the aquatic environment? Do you think people can protect the aquatic animals while the climate changes?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. I think that the idea that we've separated the two of them is an absolute joke, frankly. The idea that this is two separate concepts is just hilarious. Right? I mean, global warming, like I was saying, like the cyclical nature of all of this, you know, I mean, like we take more animals out of the sea, its ability to sequester carbon is drastically reduced. You cannot keep killing fish and expect the ocean to do its damn job. The idea that we can separate the two is just absurd. We really need to see a lot more integration of these two concepts, and at the political level, and you know, talking about climate change. The fact that when do you ever hear about fish and climate change discussions? Give me a freaking break. Come on, guys, speak up. You know. Sorry, I could go on with that forever. But...
Okay. You mentioned speciesism in animal protection movement, and I noticed there is much speciesism among aquatic animals, especially. What would you recommend on effective advocacy for all animals, and how to explain to the public that all animals matter?
Ooh. Oh, that's like a challenge that I make for myself, like the moment I wake up, quite honestly. How do I get them to care? I have to look at it from my own perspective. I think, you know, it's quite funny. From my own personal experience, the way that I've done it myself and the way I kind of get others to think about it. So I've only been diving once, right? I'm normally quite busy on land when I'm at home in Vietnam, and we have a diving center nearby, but I went diving once on my 34th birthday. I'd been vegan for like a month and a half or something at that point. And I remember going down in the sea, and I'm like, I don't care, whatever, but like I had to do this. So I get down there, and I remember I was like looking at this one little fish. It was like a little Nemo. And he just kind of like looked at me, him and his little buddies just kind of like gave me this really weird look. And I had this moment where it just felt like he was looking at me like, what the hell are you doing here, lady? You don't belong here. I don't know if it was some weird, like, I know it sounds insane, but I'm pretty sure little Nemo told me I didn't belong there and I was a really ugly fish. And I was like, you're right, I don't belong here. I'm surrounded by garbage on the floor of the ocean that comes from the fishing industry and from the tourism industry. And we are killing you for no goddamn reason. Right. So he's this tiny little fish. It's about the size of the palm of my hand. And you know, when I went vegan, I was still kind of like on the fence about fish because I was a huge seafood consumer most of my life. Like I said, I've lived in a lot of seas, or like on oceans and things like this. So that moment was really big for me. What I do in my daily job when I'm working on getting people to understand speciesism and how that affects animal advocacy movement and the ineffectiveness of our animal advocacy, I guess because I am a mother to 2 chickens and 2 pigs, I very much consider myself a parent of these babies, and I think it just comes easily now, but I mean, I like to tell stories personally, like of those individual animals. I mean, anybody that's like sat down to a beer with me has heard about like the baby mama drama. Like there is so much chicken drama if you have chickens. And so they come away generally having this understanding of, like, I'm talking about them like I was talking about cats or dogs or animals that they know, or children, frankly, or well, more like teenagers. My chickens are a little bit more like really horny teenagers. They can be very bad. So like I love them, but like when I talk about it like that, I think we need to tell their stories. As an animal advocate trying to go against the stream of speciesism, I think we need to discuss their individual stories and get those out. I think there's a lot bigger things that can go on there, but like from an individual activist perspective, this is how I combat it. I talk about my kids, you know, my chicken kids, piggy kids.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty useful way to involve more people, just to tell your stories. The next question is, what do you think is the main reason for
I mean, I think that it has a pig mother story. Sorry, go ahead. We have a little lag.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's my connection or yours.
I don't know.
Okay, so next question is, what do you think is the main reason for the legislators to ignore the aquatic animal protection by usually excluding them in the Animal Welfare Acts?
Economics. I would say economics. I think, you know, ultimately, you know, when I talk about animal advocacy, it's normally like he who with the best marketing wins, right? So the people that are speaking for the smallest animals, we generally have the least amount of money. I mean, I know from my perspective, from my organization, I know when I started speaking more about veganism as outspokenly as I do, we lost everything. I mean, like, and that has a huge impact on where our voices are heard. So the animal rights activists, we have this tiny itty bitty little voice, but the fishermen, like, a pretty big voice. Yeah, the people whose economic existence depends entirely on killing animals, they can talk all day and they're going to be heard. But the people that are protecting those animals, we don't get our voice in there. And I think for me as an animal rights activist, sometimes it could be very disappointing to see that people generally see anti-speciesist animal rights activists as people wearing hoodies and throwing blood at people and protesting the streets, and not as academics, researchers, politicians, economists, writers, artists. I mean, like they have a very singular view of who we are, so we're not brought to that negotiating table. So my suggestion is make sure we go to that negotiating table. I think to be in those political discussions, to be in those climate change discussions, to be in all of those places, we have to have those vegans, those anti-speciesists, those animal rights activists in the locations where everybody else is having the policy discussions. Yeah, so somebody that grew up in Washington, D.C., I know where these policy discussions are taking place and I know who's invited to them. Yeah, I went to university in Washington, D.C. I know all those little people that get in there. People like me don't get in there. Yeah, we have to be at that negotiating table, and we got to get in there whatever way we can, you know, and if it means getting a PhD or, you know, whatever, I don't care. Do it. Do it. We're smarter than this. Yeah.
Okay. Fishing is still an entertaining activity in a lot of places. What do you think about it? Is there anything we can do to change this?
That's such a funny question. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, murder is fun. I get it. I've been fishing. I understand that as long as you see those animals as ingredients and not sentient beings, it is entertaining. You know, growing up, you know, I went to high school in Alabama, so pretty much everybody hunts and fishes. Okay, like it's really hard to know people that don't hunt or fish or support hunting and fishing. And you know, I remember when I was fishing, I had a boyfriend who had a pier. You know, his family had a pier. They had a boat. We'd go out fishing and we take the fish. Like, you know, we go out, have a couple beers and go grab a fish, come home, fry it up, still basically alive at that point. And I never once considered it not an ingredient. was entertainment. It was something you do with a beer, right? It's something you eat with the beer, something you catch with the beer. Either way, in Alabama, it's entertainment. How do we change that? It's a great question. It took me another 15 years to change it. So like, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, but ultimately I think we have to like this thing on my screen share here. Loving animals means living vegan. I guarantee you that all of those guys that hunt and fish, they all love animals. All of them. I mean, my boyfriend that had the pier, he had a dog and a cat that slept. They were such a part of the family. You know, I mean, the cat sat at the, you know, the kitchen table, the dinner table. I mean, they were all part of this. We loved animals, but because the animal, this is the reason I didn't see it. The animal welfare organizations have separated loving animals and eating animals. They have told us that we can love animals and kill them, which is batshit insane, frankly, absolutely insane. You do not love your mother and kill her. You do not love your dog and kill him. You do not love animals and kill them, period, end of story, right? And I think we have this societal concept that you can have one and the other, and that has to change. And it's going to take a lot of work, but it's going to start with the people in the animal advocacy movement that have the largest voice, the loudest voices, the best marketing, the most money. They've got to change their rhetoric. They'd have to start standing up for animals instead of producers, consumers, and donors that are both of those. That's got to change.
Okay.
Sorry, I get very upset about those.
Oh yeah, me too. I keep seeing some hypocritical posts on social media where somebody posts that they love animals, yet they go and hunt them, and it's like, okay.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So as you said about the economical facts about fishing and law enforcement challenges, it is a sad fact that we need to kill some fishes. So do you agree that we can set priorities about what to protect first and advocate for less harm for marine animals instead of no harm?
So that's a super hard question, and one that I can't say I have a great answer to, but I have an idea of. So here's the way I think about it in terms of like veganism with land animals as well. I don't know if anybody remembers the Disney movie, The Little Mermaid, right? But there's this little scene where the little crab is talking to the king about how the little mermaid is like, she's just being so rebellious. She's just such a naughty teenager. And he says, teenagers, you give them an inch and they'll swim all over it, right? That was this famous line that the little crab said, Sebastian, little crab. Anyway, so this is something that's stuck in my mind for a really long time, and I apply it a lot to animal rights. So basically, every time we say that it's okay, it's not like we're just like, that tiny bit of approval makes people just like, oh, well, no, I mean, like they said it's okay. So like they given me this little in, so we're going to just do it, you know? But if you say none, people will still do it, but a whole lot less of it, right? So I don't think I explained it very well, but I mean, I think ultimately the rhetoric still needs to be none, but ultimately, regardless of how much we say none, people are still going to do it, right? It's just going to be a whole lot less than if we say, yeah, no, I mean, it's totally cool. Like you can totally just do whatever you want. You could just reduce your intake, and that's cool. So as far as fishing and law enforcement, I would say, like I was saying in the beginning, there are places where it is impossible for them to survive, for the humans to survive on a different diet. And so like I said, I don't really apply that, a lot of this, to those places like in the Arctic and, you know, in northern Alaska, indigenous areas and things like this. As far as fisheries management, I think what he's talking about is fisheries management at this point. Like, do we just abandon the goal of fisheries management in general? Right? I mean, like, oh, I don't know. That's the best answer I have. I think, I don't know the balance in that legally. I think, you know, the goal is always to get it to stop. And I think in my lifetime and yours, it will not happen. I'm idealistic. I'm not a moron. You know, I think like reality says that this isn't going to happen in our lifetime. but how much regulation is the right amount of regulation, to the point that we're basically just keeping it profitable? To me, the idea is to do whatever we have to do legally to prevent it from being profitable, prevent it from being easy, prevent it from, I don't want to inject money into the industry of killing. But we have to start talking about biodiversity as being more important than fish-based or marine animal-based food security and, coastal community economies. We have to really put our priorities a lot straighter. And I don't know the balance. I hope to learn that. And I think it'll take me 20 years to figure it out. But it's something to think about.
What do you think of those who say that some animals might be safe in captivity, zoos, sea parks, and when they say they saved the animals' lives because these animals would probably die in the wild or be caught?
I think that's a load of shit. I think the idea of imprisoning somebody for their protection is like almost never applicable. Yeah, I think it's like an adorable thing that zoos and say. I mean, obviously wildlife rescue is a totally, that's a kind of a different situation. Yes, there are a lot of animals that are not going to be releasable. I think those are the only situations where I would approve of such things. But ultimately, we spend so much money trying to create these little zoos and these little prisons for animals, saying we're protecting them, it's for conservation, but we haven't done diddly squat to protect their natural habitats, to make any laws to prevent anybody killing them or harming them or poisoning them or whatever, right? So we put all of our effort into doing something that's ultimately not a solution. Yeah, look, animals die in the wild. The idea that like we can stop all of natural death as animal rights activists is absurd. I don't have that ability. I've watched so many animals die in my job. I mean, like my full-time job is to watch preventable, Jesus Christ, I can't even say it, preventable suffering and death. It's horrible. It's horrible. I do what I can, but I am aware that animals will die in the wild. What do we do about it? We protect their natural habitats. We try to make sure that they can still live in the places where they were meant to live and eat what they were meant to eat. But prisons are not the answer.
Yeah. Totally agree. We have our last question for a healthy plant-based diet. I think we need various kinds of vegetables and fruits that may not be produced near our home and must be transported to us. Will this process of transportation also be harmful for the nature?
Sure, that is a great question. I mean, like what first comes to my mind is that I met my first vegans while living in Mongolia. I had a friend who, like, which is the coldest. I lived in the coldest capital city in the world, Ulaanbaatar, and like the first vegan restaurant I ever went to was in Ulaanbaatar. Okay, so this is a country of like what they got 2.8 million people. Very small population, the size of Western Europe, cold as hell, man. I mean, like we were walking to work in January, -40 degrees. Like it's not that much fun. Okay. So there's not a whole lot of stuff that grows there. I get it. I've actually paid $6 for an avocado from China. Okay. In Ulaanbaatar, desperation. I wasn't even a vegan at the time, but I'm an American. We like avocados. Anyway. The point is, yes, it is still possible to eat vegan in so many places. The girl that I learned about veganism from, she was an American, and we, she just showed me all these things, and it just got all these wheels turning in the place in the world that's almost impossible to have a wide variety of vegetables to eat, right? So I totally understand why that's a problem. So importing them, I would say I still had a pretty varied diet. Right in Ulaanbaatar, I ate a lot of Indian food. I ate a lot of Korean food. There was I ate so much kimchi, it's ridiculous. I was breathing kimchi. But I think ultimately there is a cost of that transport for a lot of places in the world. I think obviously local is better. If you can have a plant-based diet on local food, on things that are not being transported so much, I think that's ideal. I mean, for me, like I say, so I'm a vegan now for 8 years. I've lived and traveled in like 60 to 70 countries ish. The vast majority as a vegan. So I'd say probably like 10 were not originally vegan, but I've been back to those places. So I've actually never starved. I spend most of my life trying to lose 20 pounds, like every other woman on the planet. So I'm also a Ironman triathlete. I'm also a marathoner. I've been a fat vegan. I've been a skinny vegan. I've been an athletic vegan, and I've been it in Latin America. I've been it in remote areas. I've been it in, I've been a vegan in places nobody would expect to be a vegan. In the middle of nowhere, Myanmar, in Cambodia, on a bike trip into the hill tribes. I mean, like, you can be a vegan anywhere. It's okay. There is no excuse to kill animals. However, keeping that balanced sometimes takes a little more work, but it is possible. When you know why you're vegan, when you think about the victims, you'll do anything. You'll do anything to be sure that you maintain veganism. And if you find things that are more local, and if you reduce those transportation costs, that's ideal. But it's still, I don't know, it's still better than killing it, eating a plant, like I get a lot of raspberries. If I get some raspberries from Norway, instead of eating a pig from the town I'm in Poland, I'm still doing a lot better for the environment and definitely for the animals, right? So let's put that in perspective. The pig would prefer I get my raspberries from Norway.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering all the questions, and I like your passion for protecting animals, and I was so glad to host you today. And the recording will be available shortly on our YouTube channel and our
Cool.
website. And yeah, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited and having the opportunity to talk about this. I think it's something that needs to get a lot more attention. I think we need to really start injecting marine animals into the conversation about animal rights and climate change and environment and all of these things. And, it's going to happen. It's just slow. And we got to be pushy and passionate.
Yeah, that's true.
Drink more coffee. Anyway, thank you so much. And please, if anybody wants to contact me, I'm always open and available to chit chat anytime, any time zone. Talk to me.
Okay. Bye-bye.